Welcome to Under the Basswood Tree with Basswood Counsel, a podcast where we bring you brief, valuable conversations and insights to help you navigate the complex world of business transactions. From cross-border deals to international tax structuring, we cover topics across all industries. Our team and colleagues will share their insights and provide practical tips on key issues for you and your business. Let's get started.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Under the Basswood Tree. My name is Rudo Mugwagwa. I'm off counsel and co-founder of Basswood Counsel, and I sit with the corporate and securities team. My primary focus is with investment funds, private equity and hedge, regulatory compliance, and general corporate lifecycle matters. Before we begin, just a friendly reminder that this is not legal advice. Should you need legal advice, feel free to obviously reach out to us or to reach out to your own attorneys. So as a firm, we have made it our mission to dive into the world of artificial intelligence this year, primarily to understand how it impacts us as a law firm and our practice areas, and how it impacts our clients, their business, and how they operate. One of the most important areas in this space is the anti-money laundering compliance component, particularly in the financial industry. Today, I'm joined by Abbie McMillan, who is a compliance professional based in the Cayman Islands. Abbie has over 15 years of experience working both in-house and within private firms, from doing audits, consulting, conducting risk assessments, and the full gambit of compliance activity. A large portion of Abbie's clients are financial institutions, so her experience is vast. Abbie, can you share with us your experience in the Cayman Islands and how things are going on the islands in the compliance space?
Hey, Rudo, thanks for having me today. Absolutely. So as you'd mentioned, I've been in this industry for over 15 years, and I have noticed over the years there has been a shift in the AML and the compliance environments and approaches, and especially with the new technologies and trends coming out, it is a very interesting time for compliance professionals across all industries. It's not just in virtual assets or banks or anything. It's across all industries that are subject to compliance and AML requirements.
Yeah, so currently I know that you've been doing a lot of work in the digital space, which obviously is pertinent to what we're discussing today. Can you share a bit more about what that looks like for you and how you are providing services in that space?
Yeah, so I especially in the last 5-6 years, I've had a huge my kind of book of business, if you will, has moved from brick and mortar over to digital-based companies and their services. And they range from funds to Web3 applications to exchanges, large, and I'm seeing a lot of boutique exchanges coming out. So it's kind of a good cross section of everything that I am actually seeing. And it's keeping you on keeping me on my toes from a compliance point of view.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted us to be able to dive into a little bit, given your background, and obviously for us as a law firm, is we've got to always talk about the regulatory terrain, right? One of the big reports that I think has now come to impact, how multiple jurisdictions are approaching their AML frameworks is the FATF report that they produced in 2021, right? Which focused on the opportunities and challenges that come with new technologies, right? This was supposed to be, I guess, initial foundation for how members could adopt how they could adopt a certain set of actions locally, within their jurisdictions, and as well as, I guess, private sector players as well. The report obviously, took a look at the positive side of adopting some of these things, whether it's, the distributed ledger technology, APIs, tokens, and of course, AI. There was a lot said in the report about the efficiencies that can come about from adopting these technologies, especially when it comes to CDD, you know, risk assessments, the speed at which we could assessments and cross-referencing databases across authorities, and how this could impact the bottom line, right, for the private sector as well. From your view, do you see this, I guess, do you see AI playing a major role currently? Or do you think people are still approaching it cautiously now that, we're in 2025 and this report came out in 2021?
So with anything, I think there's always a positive and a negative. And it's how I personally, for me, I look at AI as a tool. There are some people who use it as the end all and be all, which I think is very dangerous. Because as AI develops and all that, at the end of the day, it is still, technology based, which means it can be manipulated. So, people who are using AI as a one-stop shop, I feel they're running the risk of encountering severe and possibly criminal deficiencies in a sense, because not all information, and it tells you on the ChatGPT and all those this information is not always accurate. But the reliance on it, I think, again, there's two sides. People are heavily relying on it, which I think is an issue. And there's people who are adopting it into their program as a kind of tool, as an assistant, and utilizing it that way, which I think is my personal opinion. That's how I use it. Like anything, there's always loopholes. There's always ways to manipulate anything. I mean, so if you're asking AI simple questions and they send out, you have no idea the validity of the information that you're receiving back if you don't look any further. And I think that is where I think that's where where the risk does lie in this case, at least in the compliance space. Because if you're asking a question and you're using AI and you're not kind of verifying the source or going further, then and you submit something and there's ramifications, is coming back to you as a person. They're not going to come after AI. They're
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I get a little bit nervous when people say, "Oh yeah, I just AI this, AI that." I'm like, no, I feel like you need to use that as an additional tool, not just the one and done. I think it has great capability, but I think it has to be used correctly and in the right context.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the events we held with Undesto, with Myra Roldan, she spoke about how there's a lot of AI washing, right? Which is sort of goes to what you're saying, that a lot of people think, okay, yeah, I'm using AI, but really it's maybe just automation, right? And I think what this FATF report did highlight, right, was some of these concerns that you've flagged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Member states responded that, some of their greatest fears, obviously outside of the regulatory, was the concerns which were, data protection, the cost of the technology, the need to have technical understanding about the technology you're adopting, as well as obviously this obviously the side of this, which is the darker side, which is dealing with the bad actors, right? Obviously, right now, people have been talking a lot about the AI action plan that the current administration in the US has brought forward. This action plan included 3 pillars, right, that sort of speak to how the government can embrace technology and support the tech community in developing tools that will push, I guess, America forward and the global community forward. They spoke about developing the necessary infrastructure in order to allow these innovators to be able to push us forward with AI, because we've only just scratched the surface. Whether it's dealing with the red tape, having enough infrastructure to deal with the amount of energy, that this technology requires, the manufacturing that's needed to be able to take on some of that tech development, right? Um, I think one of the things that we've seen, though, is that you have this thing of some governments who are approaching it more from a consumer protection perspective, and some that are approaching it more as, obviously a boost, I guess, to the economy, and trying to make sure that they're supporting the innovation as much as possible, through maybe providing, things like sandboxes to allow these innovators to be able to test out with their tools,
Yeah.
right? From your experience, have you been seeing a lot of tools being deployed in compliance that you think are ready or not ready to be deployed at large scale? Yeah, what are some of the things you're seeing being used now? Because, of course, looking back, we had World Check and, our manual checks with things like CBD. Our risks assessments were done very manually for whether, we're screening investors or, so yeah, what are some of the things you're seeing, tools people are using that you think have been good or bad, so far in 2025?
So one of the things I have come across, and I'm a big kind of nerd about this one, is the use of AI. I've seen it mainly on like Web3's applications, but it's the use of AI on analytical tools for real-time tracking and mapping of exchange transactions and anything to do like with that along the blockchain. In the past, we've had to kind of, and the technology was good. It's moving too fast now. So in the past, we would have a transaction that happened, and it wouldn't be mapped until maybe like a week or two after the fact. And at that point, you're like, but now the speed is getting a lot faster, and it to the point that there are a couple companies out there, I believe, that are working on being able to stop a transaction in like the virtual space before it happens. So
Wow.
it's yeah. And I like, this is something I completely kind of nerd out about. This is the kind of stuff that excites me because I'm like, oh yes. Because in this jurisdiction earlier this year, they introduced the AML regime, which is the Defense Against Money Laundering. And it relates to the the filing of suspicious activities. And it's in reference to sections 133, 134, and 135 of the Proceeds of Crime Act. And basically, if you are filing a suspicious activity report that you deem as being, like you're holding, receiving illicit funds, or, from that, you have to seek consent from the director of the FRA to either proceed with the transaction or, terminate the relationship, whatever. Which I think is great. But in the crypto and the digital space, there was an issue because of the delay in mapping. So I was seeing transactions that happened in October last year, but they weren't mapped until February. Well, it's an after the fact, but exactly, but I get the information, or the information is received the day it's mapped, which is after the fact, but you're still having to. So that was a bit of a issue. But so now that I'm seeing a lot of tools are being developed and softwares are being developed that are being done in real time, it is making it a lot easier to intercept or stop or, freeze, however you would like to look at it. And obviously depending on the context of the transaction, which I think is very, like I said, huge nerd on this one. And I think that has I think those are like the positive and the the attributes to it from in the financial services.
Yeah, I mean, those are, I guess, some of the things that have been highlighted, right, by the FATF, by this, these documents, I guess, around the world from governments that are trying to find that balance of how do we embrace this great tool that will actually help us combat a lot of these illicit activities so much faster, especially when you think of, the banking sector. But also, I think for a lot of financial institutions, especially when you take a look at banks, right? They have such large compliance departments, and they have to invest so much, even in some threats that are not necessarily high on their list in terms of this isn't really a threat in what we do, but we have to care about it because it's required, under our regime, right? So I guess that's my other question to you that I think is quite interesting. What do you think about AI sort of being used to take over doing things like risk assessments, right? Because I would assume if these banks are flagging that there's certain activity that just doesn't really appear, certain activity that appears that just doesn't really appear as a major threat to their institutions, how the AI would weigh that, right, in doing a risk assessment. And I guess that also goes into how the sort of black box concern that people have when it comes to AI, right? Because when you use some of these tools, there's a black box, right? You don't know exactly how it's come to the conclusions, right? Because you don't always get to see how the algorithms work, especially if you're using a third party tool, right? But yeah, how do you think that's going to play out when it comes to risks assessments and within institutions, since the data, I assume it's going to be fed, is largely going to be from the institution's own system. Of course, it'll consider other data sets, but if it is to be based on the institution and its activity, then it won't capture certain things, right? It might not.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the purpose of like risk assessments and the methodologies and the weighting behind it, I think it's a good tool, but I think it's companies. Okay, so I don't know how to explain this one. Companies are, they're either very reserved or they're very kind of, forward. If a company has, decided, for example, in this context, to deal with virtual assets, then I would think that they have a decent grasp of it. So they would know the risk and the implications behind it. And I think that would help because the virtual space is huge, massive. And so there may be risks that, you may know about that I may not know about, and vice versa. So I think in that instance, I think it's great for kind of data collection in order to make determinations. As it relates to financial institutions, I think it's more of machine learning than AI, and it will kind of allow the company to adopt as its business lines grow or the types of business or services and clients that are coming in. And I think that's a kind of healthier way of looking at it than just solely relying on AI. Because in anything, I mean, there are instances where there's, it's a very basic, very kind of A to B, very vanilla, nothing. Then there's other instances and you're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Like, what is this? And so I think it helps generate, again, it can help create a level of comfort, but only as a tool. Like, you can't just leave it at that. And I think
that's what people are starting to realize, right? Again, with this FATF, the FATF approach, right, was you want to make sure that the human component is still there, right? Because even if you are, getting to a point where risk assessments are being done at a more, I guess, a more automated level, whatever degree that is, whether it's just automating and adding the layer of AI to it, you want to always make sure that someone's actually taken a look at what's been generated and whether it would make sense, right? Because I think ultimately, for us as a law firm, it's our job to always sort of remind, boards that yes, these tools are wonderful, but you need to be able to try and grasp what they are doing. You need to also make sure that they've had that human check, right? So you yourself can explain, should you be asked, about these outcomes. You should be able to speak to some degree to the logic around why that conclusion would make sense. But again, it leads to the other issue, right? Like if you're an institution that's using a third party, right, to a third party tool to help with some of these efficiencies, you have to then care about knowing that tool well.
Yeah.
And that's the training side of it, right? Because it's very technical.
Yeah. And I mean, sorry, just kind of going back to what you had said just previously, I was attending a training last week, and the question was posed to one of the speakers. She had been asked a few times, do you think AI is going to overtake and, run, take jobs out of financial industry? And she said, no, the person who knows how to use AI better will, but not AI itself. Like there will always be a human component. And I was like, thank you. Okay, I'm not the only person that, I know some people who are convinced that, they're going to wake up one morning and everything's going to be AI. And there's going to be, no human interaction. And I'm like, no, there always has to be some kind of entry point of human interaction with machinery at any level and software and all that. So yes. Sorry. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it makes sense, right? That we have to always be thinking of the human component because ultimately the outcomes impact humans, right? For fund managers, we know that, admitting the wrong actor in because they've been assessed as low risk can have dire consequences, right, for the fund. And, if you admit the wrong person who is a bad actor, you will have to explain how it happened, right? And you won't be able to shift that liability to an application. So, I mean, I think the hope is that, institutions will invest in making sure, the teams have adequate training on these tools. I think they should have, people on the board who have some level of knowledge, or at least a committee of sorts, which is one of the things I think, Olive Consulting, one of our colleagues in industry, that's something that they talk about a lot, right? Making sure that boards are considering who they are getting their advice from, right? Yes, you have lawyers who look at it from a regulatory one, and we try our best to come in at the level where our client is. You want to meet them at where they're at. If they're someone who's, developing a tool, it is part of our job to make sure that they are considering these regulatory issues, but also just at a basic level, are you thinking of the liability attached to what you're developing? But at the same time, we are able to say, you need to make sure you have someone on your board who can actually help you review your compliance programs to make sure that you have a rubric that makes sense of how you review these tools, right? Because I think that's the thing, right? Even in these policy documents we're seeing from governments, we know that there is a huge emphasis on education, right? Making sure people understand to some degree, this very technical stuff, because you can't expect people to be able to comply if they don't really understand how something works, right?
And I think that's where, like you say, like the regulations and the policies that are coming out now, excuse me, I think it's very interesting because AI, while still in its infancy, been and has been being used in the past, and it was kind of like the Wild West. And it's like, okay, now you know how it works. Now let's rein it in, and let's put some kind of parameters on this. And what a lot of people hate regulations. A lot of people hate the acts and guidelines and stuff. But I think it's a necessary evil on this, because I think the possibilities and capabilities of the development of AI and the use of it is so vast that it has to be monitored, or else it's just going to be a free for all. And I don't even know how it's going to look,
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's why as well, people have sort of looked at the EU and sort of seen how they've, adopted a framework that really tries to look more at the consumer protection side of AI, right? Um, it's that fear of, okay, we've got to make sure people aren't just uh, dumping their information on ChatGPT without them understanding how this information can be used. How can we try and minimize that, right? You go to the people who are developing the tools and try and get them to comply, right? Because again, lay people aren't always going to know the technical things behind these tools. They're just happy that they have a tool that'll help them quickly search someone's name, or they'll add a passport number in there, trying to search. But yeah, I do think that we're going to see obviously more cases. One of our partners here, Meg, she works a lot with tech firms. Her thing is, with these new things, you always got to wait and see the legal cases that'll come out of it, and that's how you start to get the rules going. Things have gone bad for certain people, and then you start seeing the rules rolling out. Of course, you never want to be the one who's the test case, but that's what comes, I guess, sometimes with being innovative. And I think, it's obviously compliance professionals like you, other service providers, and of course, lawyers who have to try and consider all the risks that come, especially for emerging companies, first-time fund managers, who might not have as much experience with dealing with some of the regulatory terrain. From your view, what is it that you want to highlight, to financial institutions, about what things you're seeing and what actions you think they should pay attention to now as they go forward in developing their compliance plans, or, running their own programs internally?
One of the things I have, part of what I do is I draft manuals for companies, specific to companies, all of their, AML manuals, corporate governance. I have to admit, full transparency, I do shy away from cybersecurity. I am not a cyber professional. I'm not touching it. I know where to draw the line. I do think AI, whether you like it or not, it's here. It's going to be used. I think companies need to start kind of implementing internal governance policies about the use of it with their operations. And obviously different companies, it's going to look different, but I think that needs to be put in place. I have seen stories and read publications like on online about people setting up investing into funds, claiming to be you get these amazing returns or whatever, and then turns out the platforms aren't registered, they're using wrong algorithms and everything. And with that, who are you going to go after? It's all, there's no account, like if it's used incorrectly, there's no accountability. So, there's no kind of deterrent, which I think is a real issue. And that's going to be a hard one to tackle. I have heard stories, so they're just stories, and I've seen comments and stuff people are using AI to generate bots for scams, and they're using the bots as voices, and they're running scams using that, and people are losing and becoming victims to it. But there's you trace it back. There's no one there. You have no one that you can drag and you know make them face charges or accountability. Sorry, not charges, accountability.
In some
And
cases, criminal charges. Yes.
oh yeah, but and I think it's going to be a very interesting cat and mouse game in a financial setting for compliance officers and illicit activity. And I think again, I'm a huge kind of nerd on this, so I'm going to enjoy this game. I love it. I'm going to find, and I think with everything, there's a good and a bad. Unfortunately, the issue is compliance officers, like legal professionals and all that, they have to stay within the confines of their regulatory law or, and stuff like that. Criminals don't.
Yeah.
And that's where the difference is.
I think, people say, we've got to build the regime, but the type of activity we're dealing with requires people to be able to go into the deep web to hunt them down and be able to understand the world of deep fakes. And I don't know how quickly governments will be able to pull together all the talent they need to be able to have to be able to deploy the tools and people they need, right, to be able to do some of that, I guess, what we would consider investigative work. I think they really have to have that engagement with a lot of universities, professionals who've been dealing with this, but from a technical standpoint, right? I think they have to be building a pipeline of talent that is able to deal with the technical, with the mind of looking at it as investigative work, versus necessarily like on the side of, okay, I want to be a tech firm, but rather the more defensive side of tackling some of these issues, right? Because I guess for everyone else currently, right, everyone's working now to try and catch up to understand the technical, but the people who are running these schemes already understand how to use these tools. But yeah, so I think it is going to be important. The education component is going to be important, understanding that the tools we have might not be sufficient right now. What can we do to ensure that they become useful at combating these things at a much faster rate? Otherwise, I don't know if we'll capture it all. And I think you'd end up over-regulating again, right? Especially when it comes to safe space for people to be able to invest. I think you end up going to a place where you want to stop the activity because you can't keep it up, right?
I think it's I think this is just my personal opinion, just because of what I've seen and kind of what I've dealt with across over the years. I think we're coming to a kind of point where the application of AML regulations and compliance culture, they can still apply to digital new technology company services and to the traditional brick and mortar. The issue is the speed on how to apply them.
Yeah.
I don't, because everyone's like, but this regulation and doesn't really speak to a virtual asset service provider. I'm like, it does from a compliance point of view. It's the application on how it is applied to a virtual asset service provider versus how it's applied to, say, an insurance company. Same laws, regulations. They'll work, just different applications. And I think it's come to a point that this isn't going away. Remember back in 2011, everyone was very nervous about crypto and, it's not going to exist or it's not going to last. And some people were like, yeah, it's amazing. Other people are like, oh, we're never touching it. And I think the same is kind of with AI, but it's to the point, I think it's come to a point within this kind of area, that there has to be a divide. You can have your brick and mortar, but I think due to the nature, the speed, the advancements and everything with AI and technology, a different kind of, I don't want to say generation, but a different kind of group needs to kind of run with this one, because you have to think differently. The way that digital tools are used for illicit activities are not the same way a bank is used. You have to look at it differently. You have to understand it differently. You have to, the movements. You can see it, and you have to be able to understand what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, right? Because how do you combat it if you don't understand what you're seeing, right?
Yeah, you need to see how it moves, and you have to a certain degree, you have to understand how it works, like how the blockchain works, the ecosystem, and all that. You have, and I've heard people who they're talking about certain things, and I'm looking at them like,
things have changed.
Yeah, I'm like,
behind. There's so much you can talk about on the subject area, because there's just so much going on with it. It's great to be able to, I guess, start digging in, to be able to give, some of the people out there, whether they're financial institutions, or whether they're, just tech companies, everyday companies, everyone uses Microsoft, right? So I think it's great to be able to share some of these issues so that they become more alert, or at least will continue to pick up to read when they when certain updates come. Hopefully, of course, they'll think of Under the Basswood Tree, whether it's our newsletters, or whether it's this podcast, to keep up with what's going on. We'd love, obviously, to continue talking about it. But of course, then we would need weeks to be able to cover every topic. But yeah, so thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us, Abbie. We'll see you on the next episode.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. To stay up to date with the latest legal insights and Basswood events, please follow us on our Basswood Counsel LinkedIn page and visit our website at www.basswoodcounsel.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll speak to you next time.